Just in a very quick way, some key elements of the history of sustainable development. The first step, and I'm glad to be in the United States, was this lady. Who knows here in the room this lady? Rachel Carson. Okay, because in Western Europe, sorry to say, she is not that well known, except in specific areas of bioengineers, etc., but she needs to have some more statues in the States and in the global world, because you will see, sustainability is a women's affair. We have had, in the history of sustainability, very strong women to take the lead in this era. So, Silent Spring of Rachel Carson, a first awakening call on the negative effects of our growing model through herbicides and pesticides. The birds will not sing, so therefore a silent spring. 1962, the golden 60s. Then already somebody said, maybe we need to pay attention about what is happening now in our growth model, our economic model. 10 years later, the Club of Rome, now we shift to Western Europe, for the first time a book that used the word limits. Okay, the word limits was used in the 60s. The sky was the limit. But now the growth maybe needs to be limited in one or another way. So the limits to growth, the Club of Rome report 72 in the middle of the oil crisis. Really a must read is this report, the 50 years of Club of Rome document launched in October 2018, the Stockholm Resilience Center report, Transformation is Feasible, How to Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals Within Planetary Boundaries. A report to the Club of Rome for its 50th anniversary in October 2018. A must read, only because of the title, Transformation is Feasible. Next step, 87, Brundtland. A woman, doctor, medical doctor, at that time Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was chairing this commission, a commission that had to bridge the paradox between growth, development, and environmental impact of that growth, and how to deal with this, how to deal with the fact that we are in a population growth, even a population explosion situation, and the impact that had on the development, on the environmental context. And that commission delivered in 87, 30 years ago, 32 years ago, this very bold definition on what is sustainable development. Sustainable development is a development, it's not about growth, it's about developing. That meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Important is that in this definition, although sustainability comes from an environmental background, here we enter in the arena already to combine the environmental approach with the social approach, because it's about meet the needs of the present without compromise. The needs is about the fundamental needs, things people need, social needs, human rights of people. So the basic needs of people entering in the context of development. In French, we have a very nice word, so you have also the word in English, an envelope. Envelope is bringing together. It's enveloppé. Envelope is folding like this. Développé is folding open. So development is the opposite of what we know as idea of envelope. To close, it's to open. So this is not about growing only. When it's about something that opens, that is open for things, where the mindset is open. It's much more than just growth. This definition changed the United Nations, because this was the third pillar of the work of the United Nations. The United Nations was built on the Second World War, on peace and on security in 1945. They launched 3 years later the Charter here in the States, in San Francisco, on human rights in 1948. And then the third pillar is this one, sustainable development. Peace and security, the Charter of Human Rights, and sustainable development. In this Agenda 2030, those 3 pillars of the work of UN comes together. I will explain this later on. And then 92, the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, the biggest ever conference of the UN in UN history. And you see, this is 92. In 92, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was launched. It took till 2015 in Paris to have an agreement. Okay, launched in 92. Another convention on biological diversity, biodiversity, 92. In a Belgian-European context, we only have programs with companies on that topic, let's say 7 years ago, 5 years ago, vast. In 92, it was launched. In 92, the Commission on Sustainable Development was launched. That was recreated as the high-level political forum 5 years ago to have the annual meeting on the SDGs. And then 2015, the first global agenda of the UN, the Millennium Development Goals agenda. Who had worked during courses or as academic or as professional with this agenda, the Millennium Development Goals agenda? 3, 4, 5 people. Yeah. So also in Belgium, we see that this agenda was rather closed or limited to the network of development cooperation, of development aid, of the aid world. What do we see here? So this agenda was developed at the end of the 90s. We have 8 topics, 8 goals. 6 are social, the first 6. There is 1 environmental, 1. And there is the partnership idea, the idea of multilateralism. So you see, in less than 15 years' time, this environmental topic of just 1 rather broad, not very concrete topic became 5 in the Agenda 2030. So the awareness on environmental problems, you see it immediately in the changing of this agenda. This agenda was successful, but not successful enough. So all dark green are steps forward, but some steps backwards also. And therefore, there was, of course, a discussion at the UN how to have a next step after 2015. What about the post-2015 period? There were 2 debates. The first debate was, we will keep this agenda and just add 5 to 10, 15 years more. But there was also a pressure, a lobby group to say, yeah, but this agenda is a 90s agenda. This is not the agenda of 2015 anymore. We have other challenges. And so within that process, it was said, Ban Ki-moon took the lead as Secretary General at that moment. He is really the architect of this Agenda 2030. So he brought together a high-level panel to advise on the post-2015 agenda in 2012. So it took more or less 3 years to develop this agenda. And the result was, in 2014, that 17 goals in the SDG framework were presented at the General Assembly at the United Nations. This is, in short, the history. What happened? There was a new text, the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. When we look at the text, it is a resolution. It's not a treaty, it's a resolution. English text is the starting text, the basic text, then afterwards translated in other languages. And it's a text in English of 35 pages. In Dutch, it's 42 pages. We need some more words for the very compact English. So you are lucky. You can work on the first text, because translation is a difficult thing. When you read this text and you compare with the Spanish version, the French version, sometimes you think, is it the same text? Yeah, it's the same text. So it's about this text, Agenda 2030, and very important, this text has two titles. Not only the bottom line title, but also Transforming Our World. Again, it's about transformation, transition. So the ambition level is already set on the cover of the text. The first line, it's about transformation. This text was approved by all 193 member states of the UN in September 2015. So next year, we will do the roundup of 5 years out of the period of 15 years of this agenda. So when I was 2 weeks ago at the UN, it was said that today, when this text should be voted today, it should have a problem to vote it today. The context, the international political context, has changed dramatically from a UN perspective, from a multilateralism perspective. So this text, luckily, was voted in 2015. It's a challenging text. The text is a resolution, so not a treaty. That means national governments don't need to do a ratification process, but that means also that you can start the day after the resolution was voted with implementing it. So that's the positive side of it. This is the logo. I have the pin here on my costume. So this is the logo. And the most important thing, I think, of this logo, you see, of course, the 17 colors, the 17 blocks, the 17 topics of the global goals. But the most important thing is that the circle is not closed. The 17 blocks are not closed. It's not like a new dogma. The idea is to inspire you, to give guidance, to have a compass, to check with current affairs. But we need to translate, we need to rethink this global text to local implementation. Here in Atlanta, in Georgia, in the States, in the world, in companies, at the university, even in your organizations where you are volunteering, in youth movements, in family associations. Everybody can use this text as source of inspiration, but then you need to do the translation exercise, how this can be of use in a concrete situation in your country, in your city, in your state, in your university, etc. Therefore, it's open. It's not closed. We have 4 parts in the text. The first part is the vision and the principles. This is about the preamble. That is the preamble, the introduction of the text. Unluckily, the SDGs, the second part of the text, is so popular that a lot of people just skip the introduction and go directly to action. We want action. But please, take some time to read the preamble, the introduction, because The introduction is about the principles. It's about the ethical principles, the moral principles that are underlying the fundaments for achieving those goals. It's about dignity, it's about human rights, it's about inclusiveness, very important concepts that are the bottom line to start before you start the action. So moral, ethical principles. And we come back later on. So then we have the results framework, the 17 SDGs. Then we have a plan of implementation, the third part of the text. And the fourth part of the text is follow-up and review. How to review and change maybe. So even from an academic perspective, when a student should make like a text like this, with those 4 blocks, I think it's a solid text. You have an introduction with the principles, you have your core, you have how to do, implementation, and you have evaluation and follow-up. So this is a good model of text. And then in the text we have something very new, and that is the concept of the 5 Ps. I will elaborate later on, but I think this is a key image in my presentation because we go from the triple bottom line, the 3 Ps of John Elkington, to the 5 Ps in this text. So within this text, we have a new approach of the definition of sustainable development. And then we have the 17 SDGs, and this is what we call the postcard model, the postcard image. This is the official image. But in our opinion, from an educational perspective, the circular model, putting the SDGs in a circle, is more attractive and more useful than in a postcard model. I will come back also to this later on. Last part of my introduction. Why was this text so important, and was it necessary to develop? First of all, we had to think about the follow-up on the Millennium Development Goals. Secondly, we have a huge challenge on population growth, call it population explosion. We go towards 9, maybe 9.5 billion people in 2050. So this is a huge challenge from a sustainability perspective, how to feed the world, how to shelter all those people, etc. Third challenge is the world becomes one big city, urbanization. So in less than 100 years' time, between 1950 and 2050, there was a shift of population of 30% population countryside and city in less than 100 years' time. So in 1950, 70% of world population was living on the countryside, outside the city. In 2050, 70% of world population will be urban and living like we live here in an Atlantic urban environment. To show this in one picture says more than 1,000 words. This is Shanghai 1987, the moment that the definition of sustainable development was launched. You see here the biggest building at that time, the governmental building of Shanghai. Look what happened in 30 years' time. This is Shanghai 6 years ago already. This is not Photoshop, this is reality. And people that know Shanghai says, oh, Mr. Woller, there are missing 4 or 5 big skyscrapers. So just go back. This is only happened in less than 30 years' time. Okay, from a sustainability perspective, urbanization is a good thing. But of course, it needs to be inclusive. That means that families with young children, babies, and elderly, not only of 80 plus, but in our society now in Belgium, of 85 plus, of 90 plus. My aunt, 96-year-old, in her house, running around, want to shop, 96 years old. So also for those populations, we need to have a city, a community that takes into account the expectations of families with babies and of elderly of 90 plus. That's a challenge for all people working on urbanization, how to do this from a social perspective. Other huge challenges, you know them, important everyday news. This is a slide of a colleague of mine whose daughter was born in 2010. And he is an engineer, and he calculated with a research center in Belgium which sort of natural resources will be available during the lifetime period of his daughter when she will be 90 years old in 2100. And then you see two lines. The first line is when we just grow like we grow nowadays, no exceptions. That's the one here. The other one is when we have an excessive growth because of growth of population and others. And then you see that a lot of important natural resources will be not of use anymore in a period of the next 100 years. Even uranium, that is here, will be out of market. Huge challenge. Again, stressing the idea of transition. This is maybe the most important slide of this morning. This is the slide on what we call the Global Sustainable Development Quadrant. This line, the X line, is the UN Human Development Index. So this is about development, about growth, and this is our ecological footprint. The dots you see, there are three groups of dots. There are dots here, and in the middle. The numbers of the dots is the ranking of countries in the SDG ranking matrix of Professor Jeffrey Sachs of the Columbia University in New York. What do you see? In this SDG ranking, we have more or less all the European countries that are doing very well from a development perspective. But to create this development and this wealth in the countries, we need a lot of natural resources. Our ecological footprint is very high, as you can see here. On the other hand, you see here the more or less 20 worst performing countries for the SDG agenda. Most of the countries are African countries, so they have a low human development index, but at the same time, most of them are in line with what we call the natural burdens or the planetary burdens of the ecological footprint. When we want a sustainable world, then we should have the countries in this global sustainable development quadrant. But as you can see, it's rather lonesome in that quadrant at the moment. So that's the big challenge. How to help those countries to grow in such a way that it's not a burden for our environmental issues, and on the other way around, how to lower the ecological footprint of, like here are Western European countries, without challenging our wealth, our growth idea. So this is a huge, huge challenge. I've just heard this morning in the car with a colleague here that one of the countries that is discussed, maybe next year it will be Cuba. So Cuba is one of the dots that is nearest by the Global Sustainable Development Quadrant. where you have that very difficult equilibrium between social health questions, environmental governance, and some political restrictions in doing things as part of that concept. A huge challenge. And this, to end, is the Country Overshoot Day 2019. Do you know the concept of the Overshoot Day? So here you see the date, and the United States are very early already. It was in March, I saw, 15th of March. So what does this Overshoot Day says? It's celebrated every year, but celebrated between brackets. So that means in this case that the United States of America uses all natural resources between the 1st of January and the 15th of March for the whole year for this country. Belgium is half August, more or less. It's not here on the screen, but it's half August. So the Belgian population uses natural resources, sorry? April 6th. Here, April 6th, indeed. Ooh, we did bad then. Last year it was in August. Oof, what happened with Belgium? Oh yes, thank you. Very alert audience, yeah. But you see, okay, for a lot of countries, so only the countries that are not on the screen are doing well, are in line with like that equilibrium between wealth creation and impact on the environment and using natural resources. Take a look at this website, the Global Footprint Network. It's a very nice way to show what the challenges are from an environmental perspective.